Yeah, so the backstory again is it's a hypothetical e-commerce site that sells guitars. There's three different teams involved in doing it. The devs, of course, they're creating the application. They're doing it in their own environment. It's sort of separated from the world the ops worries about. They do their own deployments. They do their own config management. They have their own scripts. They manage access to the host their own way. But as soon as they need to get to staging or production, they involve release engineering or ops because it's a controlled environment, PCI, customer data there, and they don't want to allow those devs in there. So that's kind of the situation there. And how things have been going up to this point is when they need to do a release, release engineering gets notified. They're supposed to identify the binaries and the versions that's supposed to go into staging, where release engineering does a test in the staging environment, and then if the deployment goes okay, then they promote it again to production, and where ops can do the deployment for themselves. So that's how it's supposed to be divided up. Unfortunately, the way it's kind of worked out up until this point is there's kind of a sprawl of scripts everywhere. Devs doing it one way, Relenge does it their way, ops does it their way. They're all managing access to the host their own way, and this has made InfoSec pretty unhappy, and they're hoping for something better. It's also very error prone because it's not like being repeated exactly the same way in each environment. There's different code that does it, different procedure to do it. And so sometimes people waste a lot of cycles just figuring out things that went wrong due to one of those problems, different kind of script, different kind of process. So a lot of lost time. Okay, so that's kind of the story behind it. And that probably sounds like a story you've heard a bunch of times. It's not a very unusual place to be. So that's what this demo shows off. This demo kind of will give you the picture after the teams have worked together to achieve some of those goals of smoothing the handoffs and making it more self-service and stuff. So here we are looking at the Rundeck user interface, and this demo only has. Yeah, go ahead.
One question, Alex. One question. You said that the binaries would be stored. So are we using Nexus or Artifactory for this, or what is the tool we are using?
Yeah, in this demo, it's been simplified, but Artifactory or Nexus are good examples of what people actually do. There's some plugins that would let you do that. But yes, you've got it right. I mean, that's the tool chain, sort of the best practice tool chain is to have a real repository where the build tool is publishing to it and the release tool is pulling from it. And of course, it should be a gold master all the way through, the gold copy. So, okay, yeah, that's a good question. Now, there's two projects in here, one called Guitar Stage, one called Guitars Production. You can pretend there's other environments that I don't have in this demo. There could be Guitars QA and Guitars Git and so on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. The other thing I'm showing off here is that you can embed README files in a project. Now, README file is just some extra documentation that you might want to include for a project because somebody might want some kind of high-level overview, or maybe there's some facts about what's going on with that project you want to share with people. And you can even embed graphics and stuff. You can just use it any way you want. It's just a markdown file. I'm going to click on the Guitars Production because that's really where I'm going to do the demo. It's similar in the other project though. So I clicked on the project, and you'll see that, first of all, there's this list of jobs. The UI is divided up into these kind of 4 areas. Jobs are the routine processes that you're going to run. So you create jobs to give you that single button click to kick off some type of automation workflow. And we'll run those in a minute.
Alex, one question. Would it be same in the pre-prod environment also? Like the same steps would be followed in the pre-prod, is it?
Yeah.
This is used only in the production environment.
Well, that's up to you, but yeah, I think a lot of times you would have the same. I think generally you want to see the same pattern. You want to build it on the same automation building blocks. But there are changes between production and stage, for example. In a production environment, you might be involving load balancers and alarm, settings, where in staging you might not have to. So there could be a lot of the same jobs, but they may be slightly different depending, on what you're automating.
Okay. I hope you don't mind. I'm interrupting you with questions.
No, it's good.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the jobs, and like I said, we'll run these jobs in a minute, but I just want to give you the bigger overview here first. The next is the nodes. These are the remote hosts that you're managing, and I can click on them and get some information. So remember, I was saying how the organization, this Guitars e-commerce organization, wants to have some basic information about what's going on there. So in this example, we know what version of the guitar app it is. It's 1.0. We know the state is running. Even, you can put other detail in here. In fact, in the Rundeck model, you can invent any attribute you want about a node. There's not like a fixed schema or anything. Nodes can have their own data. They may share the same kind of data, but that's not required. That's just conventions that people create. Also, this data can be fed from other tools, Puppet database or Chef server or your in-house CMDB or Amazon EC2. Those are all example plugins that people use. You can write your own. You might have a custom database where you store this kind of inventory data. You might even maintain this data as files in your Git repository. So this is a plugin point to Rundeck that I'm really talking about here. You can surface as much or as little data as you want. It just depends on how you want to use it. All of this data you see in here become variables to your scripts, your commands, your jobs. So you can make your automation data-driven like you would be used to in other kind of config management tools. So this is another really big plus in Rundeck, is that it merges data about your infrastructure from different tooling. And so one thing is nice about that is you kind of have these authorities of truth about what's going on in your infrastructure, and Rundeck is just consuming that and sharing it. So it federates that view, and everybody's automation is going to be keyed to the same thing. So this made kind of a very technical point, but I think it's very important because at the end of the day, it's about collaboration, about tooling, and Rundeck is really trying to play ball here with that idea. Okay, so I can navigate this view by clicking on things. So for example, I might say I just want to look at the web stuff, and then I might want to build a little view about the web stuff. Like I want to know that what their state is. I want to know what their version is. So I can create this little dashboard, with columns for the attributes that I care about. I can save that as a filter, and I can reuse that. And this is nice. Like I say, if you want to share a particular view about what's going on, you can create these filtered views. And people put these views up, for example, in a big screen display or something. People like to do that. Okay, so let's say I've got a set of nodes and I'm thinking, oh boy, I want to run a command on those nodes that match that. So I'm going to run a very trivial command. It's just the Unix ID command. But what it's doing there is now it's showing off Rundeck's dispatch capability. It takes that command string and dispatches it to those hosts, and you can see the output there. So this is what we call an ad hoc command. We consider this sort of an advanced feature for only a particular kind of admins, but people use this feature to diagnose or report on what's going on in an infrastructure. Something might be looking funny, or some people just want to run a command to find out some facts about the infrastructure, and they don't know exactly how they want to construct it. So they, just type in the command string until they get to the result they look for. So um, so we call that the ad hoc command.
Okay.
And then the last view here is the activity view. And this is really just a history of what executions have been going on. You can see there's my ID command. Here are some jobs that ran. If the jobs take options, you see that there. And the point is that I can click on this and come back and see my output again. So we'll do that when I run a job. But this is really a key feature. You want to know what nodes it happened on. You can start to see it's a pretty sophisticated interface in collating the output to the command and node that occurred. This is useful, when you have a more complicated workflow to understand what you're seeing. You can.
Can I ask you one question, Alex?
Mhm.
Say, suppose we are doing a production release or something. Say, for example, we are releasing, doing 4.1 release, for example.
Yeah.
And we put the steps in jobs, is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, we put the steps. And if we want to go back, we can see in the activity, like, say, the release 4.1 is today. So I put job 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever steps we capture in the Excel sheet. We capture that and we can run that automatically or manually. Am I right, or how does that happen?
No, you're right. Actually, that's a excellent explanation. In fact, one of the case studies that you'll see on the Rundeck org site is from data.com. It's a Salesforce division. And that's exactly the story that they told. They had what they called the deployment plan, I believe. It was a multi-tab spreadsheet. Each tab represented a phase in the release. Each tab had rows that were the individual steps and commands that somebody would type in, and who would do it and what order, and dependencies. You can sort of picture how that would go. And what they did was they tab by tab in the spreadsheet converted those to Rundeck jobs until they had no more need for that spreadsheet. One of the biggest benefits that they like talking about, or they're most excited to talk about, is before, when they had just the spreadsheets, they had many project managers and line managers and leads and so on asking the release people, hey, how are you doing on that step? Is that guy ready for the next step? Can I
Yeah,
see
I
some?
know. I've come across this situation, and suddenly, like in step 3, people developer says, "I've forgotten this one. I'm sorry, and include this step." So then it becomes chaos and all those things. I've seen it live, Alex.
Yeah. And the sad part is, if somebody did forget a step or did it out of order,
Yeah.
then all the managers start getting concerned, and they're all looking over everybody's shoulder. And and
Yeah.
that's the thing that he enjoyed the most, was he got everybody off his back. He in fact just sent out URLs, and we'll see what it looks like in a second here, on how to follow the job themselves. And then the managers were very happy. They felt more enabled to to know what's going on and not to feel like they were dependent on asking somebody else what's going on. So that it's a communication benefit there, but it's a big one. It removes the stress and the pressure from a release. So yeah, on that note, let's go to the jobs, and let me just kind of orient you here too. There's a few folders here. These folders are called job groups.
Yep.
You can create a hierarchy for your jobs any way you want. There's no opinion about what you should do here. It's just meant for navigation. But it does tie to the access control policy. So you might want to, for example, restrict a group of people to only see a subfolder and nothing else around it. So the groups kind of play two roles. One is to give you a nice kind of visual organization, but secondly, as a way of providing filters to give access to read, write, and so on. In fact, I'm going to run through these jobs, and then I'm going to show you the policy in action.
Okay.
So
One more question. One more question. Sorry.
sure.
This would be a client server model, or it is just I install it on my laptop and I should have the access for the deployment servers. How does that work, Alex?
Yeah, it's what we call an agentless architecture. You stand up a Rundeck server anywhere you want, I guess, as long as it has
Oh,
the network access to the host. Um, I mentioned there's this dispatch capability. That's a plugin point we call the node executor. And for a Unix box, the built-in node executor uses SSH. So really what you need is a box that has SSH access to the nodes you want to manage. And I mean, that's sort of the generic install.
oh, okay. So it doesn't need an agent. It's an agentless, right?
Yeah, it doesn't need an agent, no.
Wow, awesome it
Yeah.
is.
And that's a big selling point. You know, we hear that a lot.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Now that's not to say you could actually there. Let me put it this way: there are some customers, users that have, for their own reasons, built a alternative to SSH. You know, it may sound a little crazy, but I have heard
No,
of
I
companies.
I understand actually because we have that SSH restrictions and firewall settings and all those things. Am I right?
Well, it could be that, yeah. You know, like let me give you a couple examples. There's two users that I've talked to. One has a command execution framework that is based on XML RPC. They didn't want to use SSH. They thought it would be more
Mm-hmm.
secure to write their own thing and make it XML RPC. So that's an
Mm-hmm.
agent that's already out there on each box. And
Mm-hmm.
they wrote a plugin called a Node Executor plugin that when Rundeck wants to run something, it passes it to this plugin, and the plugin knows how to talk that XML RPC to those boxes. Um,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
so in that sense, you know, you could build a client server if you needed to, but out of the box, Rundeck is agentless. It doesn't depend on anything other than something like SSH, but you can plug in whatever you want.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so we have release, we have database. So database pretend is like some kind of database processing, reporting, extract, load thingy. Um, Release, you know, that's lets the release engineering guys, they've got to promote binaries and they got to deploy. Um, and then web restart status and all this kind of stuff. This is kind of the operational side. Let's pretend that the guitars app, you know, it's sort of not exactly memory efficient. Sometimes it locks up, and gets called to have to restart the guitars app. So this is an example of collaboration between the dev and the ops teams on what's the right way to restart the app. Don't use your own scripts. Let's collaborate on the same way, and then we'll use the same way in all the environments. So that's the idea with the restart. So let me click on the promote though. Um, so jobs take options, and you can think of a job as like a form, basically, of fields that sometimes are required, sometimes they're not required. Also, you can build these jobs options so that they are dependent on each other. They cascade. So I've got this repository, the CI repository. It's got a few different things in there. But if I click on this, let's say I want to pick from the stable repository, now I have different choices. So let me just do that a few times so you can notice that. See, the values here are changing based on what I choose up here. You seeing that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And likewise, so like if I go to stable and I pick, oh, V1 is the release, but I want V1 too, then those get changed also. Okay. So this is kind of important, especially for something like, you know, dealing with a Nexus or an Artifactory or something, because, you know, usually you're picking what repo and then what artifact type and then a version and, you know, however deep it needs to be. Um, Rundeck lets you do that kind of stuff. So
So how is this done? I didn't understand the back end. Like when the Jenkins run the stable job, these app, Debian, web are stored? How do you get these packages?
These choices are coming from a little web service. So
Okay.
so Jenkins and Nexus have plugins for Rundeck that provide that little web service. Um, it's also pretty easy to write your own little web service. In fact, you could write as trivial as a CGI script that does nothing other than query some backend and provide JSON data. That's really what this is. It's JSON data um, to with name value pairs basically. And let me just I'll edit the job and show you how it's defined in a second. But that's where it comes from. It's JSON data. The JSON data can come from a web service, or you could even store JSON data if it's fairly static. You can store it, on Rundeck or someplace else. But at the end of the day, that's all it is. So you make your choices. So let me just make these choices, and um, it's up to the job steps as to do something with the option values the user's given it, right? So that comes down to the steps of the job. So, let's say if it was a Nexus promotion, there is a whole other demo for Nexus, by the way.
Oh,
If there was a Nexus promotion, then what you really be doing is you'd be querying for the artifacts and versions you want. And when you promote, the job step is going to call a plugin that uses the Nexus API to actually get those artifacts and to write them into something else. So when I showed you the job form, that was really just to tell the step what values to use to pull something from the repo. But yeah, that's still the step that does that. I hope that's obvious.
okay.
Okay, so anyway, so let's pretend there we go. We just promoted it, and now I want to deploy it. And here's another thing I forgot to tell you about in the backstory. That it's a controlled environment, so they need to have a trouble ticket assigned. So this is pretty normal stuff, right?
Yeah, this was my next question actually. But can we integrate with Remedy or ServiceNow? And yeah, Jira is one more issue tracking.
Yeah, exactly. So what we see a lot of times is that the change board has issued a ticket, and nobody's supposed to do anything unless that ticket exists, or they get in big trouble. And then when they do their work, they're supposed to update that ticket for every bit of work that's done, right? And then finally, when all the work's done, somebody closes the ticket, right? So that's been a pain point in this story here, and so in the solution, that's what we're reflecting is, do you have the ticket? Which ticket is it? So I picked the ticket here, so it's putting it there. By the way, I'm also kind of forgetting to say that you can require certain kinds of input, or you can restrict certain kinds of input. So in this case, look, I can't type in anything. I have to pick from one of these choices.
Hmm.
Whereas in this one, I can pick for some choices, but I could also say, oh, I know exactly what it is.
Okay.
Okay, so it's just part of how the form works. But anyway, just wanted to bring it up. The other thing is I can do here is I can see what nodes it's going to go to. It's going to go to these two nodes. But there may be some days where I say, I only need it to go to that node.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to just let it go the way it was. And then this little picture here, this is a graphic. Remember I was saying you can have a markdown file for a project. Well, you can have markdown for your job also. And I just put a silly graph in here that represents the performance of the app. So, and then each of these lines represents a deployment. you might have seen this kind of thing before, but it's you hear about it in like conferences and DevOps talks and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
it's a change correlation graph. When you make a change, does performance go up or down? Sometimes it indicates that the release has screwed it up or something procedurally has screwed up the app because of the change. And what you want to see is something like this. You make a change and the line remains in the same trend.
Stable. Yeah.
Yeah, rather than this one over here at 1600, you make the change, or maybe this one, you make the change and things start dropping off, or this one, it looks suspicious. So anyway, I mean, Rundeck doesn't do anything other than the ability to link to an image in Markdown. But this could be useful to somebody who has to run the job. Like give them some situational awareness. And if they say, "Oh man, the app's looking pretty bad right now. Should we be touching it?" That's a conversation somebody can have. Anyway, so let me run the job, and I'll run this job a couple times just so I can show you what's going on in the GUI. So the first thing is this is the summary tab, and it's meant to just be very brief. This is a pretty trivial demo. It's only a couple nodes with not many steps, and this is an information overload, but in the real world, this could be dozens of machines with that many steps as well. And you just want to give somebody a scorecard view of what's going on. So this could, depending on the scale of your release process, you might put this on a big display someplace, and this is enough information. I'm going to run it again and show you the other views. This is the monitor view. This gives you a more logical picture of what's going on. You can see, it's checking the Jira issue and it's going through the install. And notice it's happening simultaneously, right?
Yeah.
So it's also being done concurrently across the nodes. This is up to you. You can decide to do it sequentially across nodes, like do the first machine, then do the second machine. You might have to be very careful about rolling out change. Or depending, you could do things simultaneously, like do 2 at a time or 5 at a time or all of them at a time. Those are just settings that you can decide to do.
So this is similar to multi-service deployment, right? We have like different projects, A, B, C, and if you want to deploy like all together, or there is some dependency, service 1 is dependent on 2, so we can do it in the activity. We say like after this one,
Yeah,
do for this.
that's right, and that's the real use case there. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. You would have probably layers of jobs. Each layer has a job that targets the tier of the architecture you want to update, and then you can have a higher level job that calls across all the tiers in the order you want. There's a lot of customizing you can do in terms of ordering, but you've got it right there. So in this view also, I kind of showed this before, I can just click down to the output for each step. I might, again, this isn't that real world because there's only one line. Usually you'll have who knows how many lines for each step, but just make it easy to navigate. And then, one of the most common views is this view, which is kind of the tail view. And I'll run it again here just so you can see it. And this is as if you had all the jobs appending to a single log file, and you just want to tail the log file. So that's kind of what you're seeing here. Other than, you notice there's still metadata about what's going on. This is that step on that host, and so on. So it's a kind of gives you a Unix tail view of the world, but still has the context of the workflow to help you know where did this message come from. It's up to you what you find best view and what's going on. Then you can also get the output in different forms. This one doesn't have a very sexy output, but you can download it as a file. So those are the views of the of the execution. Actually, I wanted to change it to a different version because it was already on version 1.0. Let's change it to 2.0. The reason I want to do that is I want to show you back at the nodes page here. Oh, I can also say, you notice this progress bar, it says 24% of average, 30 seconds. So when you run a job, Rundeck records the execution time, and it starts to calculate an average time for the execution. So if you've done it 10 times, and each time was, I don't know, 29 to 31 seconds, let's say the average is 30 seconds. So if you ran the job, and look, this time was 27 seconds, so it's a little bit faster than average. But let's say you ran the job and it was 60 seconds. The progress bar changes color, and it's just sort of an indicator that maybe something's different out there. It's causing things to go slower. Maybe somebody's added some new steps that you didn't know. But it's just feedback to the person that runs the job. Are things like they were the last few times, or is it something a little different? Okay, so let me go to the nodes page now, and I wanted to show you the package. So now it's 2.0.
Yeah.
Right. I could do it again, I guess, just to so I'm not pulling a fast one. Anyway, the reason I'm showing you that point is the job steps can make the change on the box, but you can also record what happened back to Rundeck through that that inventory view. And like I said, when people are using something like Chef or Puppet, this is sort of kind of normal, because you're getting the fact information from the Puppet database or the however node attributes you're using in Chef. Those things could be setting values internally, and then that view gets pulled back into Rundeck. So it's just another way of surfacing what versions are going on out there. So everything should now be 2.1. Okay, there you go. All right, so that was the deploy job. I'll just run the restart job. It's kind of like what we just saw, except that let's say that you want to have different modes of restart. Like sometimes the normal mode's what you want, but if the server's really hung up, you want to pick the force mode. This is more just an idea of what people are doing when they collaborate. Dev and ops collaborate. They learn that sometimes you need to have a normal and sometimes you need to have a force, and how you're going to implement it and so on. But the point is, what's the user experience for the ops guy? Make it simple for them, and so that's really all I'm showing you here. Again, we got the Jira check, and going to the monitor view, same kind of thing, showing you the logical and so on. So it's even recording all this stuff back in the node view. Okay, so good. You saw that little yellow thing there.
Yeah, I saw.
Right. So let's actually edit one of these jobs so you can see what it looks like.
Can we do this runtime, or it has to be done before?
You can do it anytime.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do it anytime. You can do it while that same job is running, but when you run a job, Rundeck creates a copy of the definition to use for the execution, and then saves that copy of the definition in the execution record. So you might be changing it while it's running, but you're basically creating a next version of the definition, because the one that was using the execution is basically a copy of that time. So you always can go back to the history and get the exact definition that was used for that particular execution. So anyway, there you go.
Okay. One more question. I see that here, we are doing all commands or scripts which are already available. Say, suppose some of the things which cannot be automated or something. Do we have something like say like we record and say, just for example, I'm saying WebSphere, say suppose deployment script next. Uh, we might have to do a lot of changes there, and we cannot use script. And suppose if that is the situation for one project, can we record that and put that in the instead of the script? Is it possible to use something like that, or say there's no command option at all and it has to be done GUI itself? How does that work?
I think I know what you mean. You're saying that there's certain steps that for one reason or another you cannot automate, uh,
Right.
and but you want to have a single workflow that when you reach that point, somehow I guess it just stops or something,
Yeah.
and then you go out of band and do the thing the old way, and then you resume it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or do we have anything like that is one option, like we stop and we do that manually. That will not achieve 100% automation. So do we have any substitute for that so that we can record and play, or even like what is the option if we have something like that?
Yeah. The main yes, this comes up, of course. The main pattern I've seen is, and let me go back to the jobs page here. The main pattern I've seen is you create a group of jobs. Like let's let's pretend this didn't say release. Let's pretend that said release July 16, and below it are the main stages of the release. And oops, and some of the stages are fully automated, like you just push the button and it's going to go all the way through. But some of the stages, let's pretend this is the stage that's not fully automated, the promote stage. Um, you have to do something by hand, or maybe it's not that. You have to go tell another group of people that you have no control over to do something for you. And so in that case,
Right.
you would write a job that does nothing except take your text input and save it somehow. So it might not do any really saving. It might just write it to a file or echo it back, but it's basically a note that's going to be in the execution history. And so now pretend this. So you this said release July 16, so you click on that. This is what everybody's going to be looking at. And then you say click the button. Let's pretend we're doing it here. Don't worry about the names that are being used here. Just pretend that. So now that one's done. And then you'd say, okay, click this button, and that represents the out of band thing. And then that one's done. And then you click that button. And so what happens is you're basically clicking down the list as if they were checkboxes until you get to the end. So when it's broken up like that, that's the most typical way I've seen people do it with Rundeck.
Mhm.
I hope that came through because it's sort of a little bit. Well, did that come through? Did the idea come across?
So it would be manual itself. So we give it to the team and they have to do the step and it comes back, or we have to do it manual. Did I understand properly?
Yeah, I mean yes, I think so. I mean the main point I was trying to make here is that what you described to me is a broken up process,
Right.
and so you just reflect that as a job group. So this is the part of the process that's automated. Then it gets broken up by this manual part, and then it goes back to the automated part. I mean, when I'm pointing at these words, I know these words aren't playing the story I'm trying to tell you. I'm just really pointing at the lines in the group. Like you have the first job means run the automated part. The second job means call the other group to do something manual. The third job is go back to running an automated thing. And you can create a pattern of this. So data.com, I'll go back to that example. I told you how they took a bunch of tabs in a spreadsheet and turned each of those tabs into jobs. Well, to go a little bit deeper into that they would have a spreadsheet, a new spreadsheet for each release. And if you looked at the different copies of those spreadsheets, they kind of looked the same, more or less. The things that were different were like the versions or sometimes, some environment context detail, but procedurally, they were almost always the same. So what they do is they have a job which creates a new set of jobs that conform to this idea I'm telling you about. So when they need to make a new release, they have a job that will create a brand new set of jobs who are only meant to be run once for that release date, and the job group has the name of the release in it. So they've kind of created this template of jobs that they use to create the next set of jobs for their next release. And the template has, tokens in there to take the, like the name of the release, the version of the release, the day of the release, the milestone of the release. Those are all kind of tokens that get replaced in the job templates. And when they load the templates, then it's really clear, oh, that group was from last week's release. That group was from the week before. That one is for next week's release. And yeah, like I said, I mean, they are also a place where there are a few different stages in the release that depend on some other team doing something for them. So they even create a placeholder job that just means that, like I just told the other team to go do their thing. It's like a database administrator team, right? They had to go change some schema thing, and we can't do it. They're the ones who do it. They're doing it manually by running a SQL script out of band. But all the managers want to know where we are in the release, so they can look at the Rundeck and say, okay, there they are on that stage of it. So Rundeck's kind of a simple tool, but I think it's because it's simple and it gives you these simple things like groups and ways of organizing things and create templates and patterns that you can create, I think, pretty sophisticated ways of conveying what's going on to people in a reusable way. So anyway, that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but that's something I've seen more and more. Okay, so let me just go back to editing the job here. So here's this is the group thing here. I can create my own group. I can pick a group that's already there, give it a name. You can put markdown here. The first line is just a brief summary. If you put a blank line, everything below this is markdown. So anyway, you can format the text the way you like after that. Here are the options. So this is actually calling the little web servicey thing to get the Jira issues, the URL. I mentioned it's really just returning JSON. So whether it be a plugin in Jenkins or Nexus or something like that, or you write your own little web service, either way, they're going to make some kind of query and return a JSON object back. You can, say it's plain text. You can say it's secure, then it won't show you the plain text, whatever the value is. Give it default value. Restrictions, this turns it into a text field or a drop down with a text field or just a text, just a drop down. You can make it multi-valued, so instead of it just being a choose one, you can choose multiple. That's what the promote step did, was made it multi-valued. And then whatever option name you invent becomes a variable that you can use in different types of syntaxes here. So, becomes what we call job context. So that's an option. Here's the workflow. So this is a plugin. It's called the Jira Exist plugin. it basically just goes and queries Jira to see if the issue exists. You can also have error handlers here. So let's say you have a step that fails. You can decide what to do about it. In this case, the reason I put this error handler here is that this is actually trying to hit a live Jira account, but that this Jira account is not always active. So sometimes it fails. And so I just put a little, you can make any step that is part of your Rundeck install be an error handler. So in this case, I've just picked a command step to echo something out, but I can do anything. And then you can see here is if that error handler is successful, you can either continue the failure of the step, or you can say, hey, the error handler fixed whatever was wrong, and I'm going to keep going, which is what I've chose here, keep going on success. So if the error handler succeeds, consider it not a problem. That's up to you how you use an error handler. Sometimes people use error handlers to do a cleanup, kind of a graceful cleanup before it dies out, or some other kind of interesting things they do with error handlers to make things idempotent, actually. Anyway, so that's error handler. These next three steps are actually jobs. So, one job can call another job. We talked about that already. Jobs sometimes take options, so you can pass options that this job defined and pass it to the next job. And, you could keep going, doing that deeper and deeper. So those are the job steps. The other thing is there's different ways you can manage errors at the whole workflow level. So, if any step fails, should you end immediately or keep going until you finish the job and then end in an error? There's different reasons for wanting to do one or the other, but there's error handling at different levels. So there's this workflow error handling level. There's a more granular one on a per step level, which is what I told you about. Okay, and then the next part of the job definition is where to execute it. So I could execute locally, which in this case wouldn't make any sense because I want things to happen on those web nodes. So I clicked on that. And then here I can filter the nodes I want. So, currently it's these two nodes. But when I was in the nodes page, when I was clicking around in there, you may not have noticed it, but it was building up a new filter expression. So you can query the nodes list using this filter expression, and it just previews what nodes would match if you ran it right now. Here's a thread count, so you can run things concurrently or not. The restart, I guess it's running it concurrently. Sequentially. You can also sort the nodes by an attribute value. So let's say that you have a web pool, but you always want to do certain nodes in the web pool before other nodes in the web pool. You can define an attribute for the nodes, and then Rundeck will sort the nodes on that attribute, and then you can decide is it ascending or descending. So this sometimes is useful, but anyway, that's why it's there. And then also what to do on errors. So like I said earlier on steps, do you keep going to the next step? Well, this is the parallel to that, but for nodes. If you try to run a job step on a node A and that step fails, do you want to try it on node B and then node C and so on? And at the end, you'll find here's a list of failed nodes. And Rundeck will give you an option to rerun the job just on the failed node. So that's useful. Sometimes, like in a cloud environment or an old data center, there can be some glitches on some of the nodes. You might have hit 95% of them successfully, but 5 of them somehow screwed it up. And somebody goes around and finds out, oh, well, somebody put a patch on this, or somebody changed some some setting there, and I've just cleaned it up, and I want to rerun the job just on the nodes that had the problem. So that's where this stuff becomes useful. And then notifications, you can see here, if it succeeds, do certain things. If it fails, do certain things. When it starts, do certain things. These are all plugins. There's only a couple example plugins here, but this is a good one. I told you earlier how in our guitar story, the ticket should be updated after each step, and that's what this is actually doing. Is it takes some of the output of the job run and attaches it to the ticket. So when you go looking at Jira, you'll see there's the ticket that was checked in the first place to see if the job would run. And then as the job steps execute, it's appending to that ticket. So at the end of the job run, somebody can look at the ticket and see this trail of all the jobs and steps that happened. And it's nice because it sort of explains what went on automatically. And in the ticket itself are links back to Rundeck. So let's say, the things that are being appended to the ticket are kind of summary. You don't want to append a megabyte of output to it. So you can click from a link in the ticket back to Rundeck to see the gobs of output from there. So anyway, that's what this is for.
For this demo, like when we are using this Jira connection, so we should have the Jira server ready, and Jira URL should be active, right?
Yes, exactly. Otherwise, yeah, right. Yeah. And when we did this demo originally, we were using the Jira on demand. So if you use that, then it should be simple, I guess.
Okay, but Jira is not free, right? We should go for the subscription and.
Yeah, right. It's not free. So, but in any case, yeah, the on demand is cheap if you wanted to try it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what you want to do there. I wanted to make a point about HipChat, not HipChat per se, but the idea of talking to a chat system. Are you familiar with chat ops?
Yeah, I know, and it's like a collaboration, right? For collaboration.
Yeah, so a lot of people like Rundeck talking to their chat server. So there's a few different plugins like HuBot and Lita are two popular bots that know how to talk to different chat systems. And so, there's certain companies that have that kind of culture where they all kind of collaborate in chat, and the tools talk to the chat, and the chat can talk to the tools. Rundeck can do all that stuff using HuBot and Lita. HipChat is not quite as sexy and sophisticated, but it will tell the chat room what's going on inside Rundeck job. So I don't know.
So HuBot is a kind of a robo. I think I've seen a seminar or talk where you can record the commands, and HuBot is kind of a robo that goes and does the same commands, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can tell the bot to go run a command, or if you're Rundeck and you have the HuBot plugin running there too, Rundeck can tell HuBot, I'm doing this, and if you want to stop it, send this command back. So very, very cool things people are doing with chat ops. And anyway, Rundeck, this is where the hooks are to to do that kind of thing. Now, all these examples that I've shown you so far are kind of on-demand jobs that you run. Like release is a good example of that. Somebody decides when it's time to do it, and then you push the button to do it. But another big use case for Rundeck is as a batch job scheduler. So the remaining part of this edit page here is really for that use case. So let's say, actually, we have an example of that here. This guy here. okay, it's not a very sophisticated example, but it's going to
Mm.
run at midnight every day, right? And like let's say it should run, in less than 120 minutes, or it should fail. And then if it fails, try it one more time.
Mm.
So that's another.
It's similar to the cron job, right?
Yeah, exactly. So people retire things like Control M or AutoSys
Mm.
or
Yeah, yeah.
cron itself. Yeah, exactly. You know, you might have a lot of cron tabs running on different machines, and then somebody forgets to update the cron tab on one of the machines, and things kind of start getting funny. You can have a centralized cron basically with Rundeck. Um, and I would say, probably 25% of the user base is using it just as a job scheduler. So, um, yeah, it's important. It tells you when it's going to run next and so on. So yeah, that's basically the tour of a job definition itself. And yeah, so the last thing I was going to show you is I've been doing everything as admin. That's why
Mm.
I've been able to do all these things, right? I've been edit
Yeah.
jobs, delete jobs, run jobs. I basically can do anything I want. So I'm gonna log out and log in as ops. Okay, so first of all, look, ops doesn't see the other project. Remember there was guitar staging?
Yeah, yeah,
Now
yeah.
I can't see it. So click on
Mm.
that one. Also, I can't
Mm.
deploy. I can't
Mm.
promote. I can't do in the database stuff. I can just
Mm.
do this stuff. And now look here, I can't edit it either.
Mm.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So I can run it, but I can't change anything.
Mm.
Let me log out of ops and let me log in as dev. So dev's able to look at both projects, but look, you can only see the restart job, cannot run it. But the dev wants to know what restart process is actually happening here. They want to have visibility into it, and they also want to see the history of it, but they are not allowed to run it.
Mm.
But status has been deemed safe for them to run. The teams have worked out that this status job won't hurt anything, won't cause any performance problems or anything. It has no side effects. So let them run status, because they're interested to see how their thing is working. Um,
Mm.
Also, look, they can only see two nodes.
Mm.
Because let's say in the story here, they only want to know the status of the web tier because that's where their app's running. They shouldn't be looking at any other tier.
Mm.
Okay, so that's dev, and then let's go look at releng.
A release engineer, is it?
Yeah. Oops. Yeah.
So who would be normally administrating the run deck? Would it be a release manager or?
It depends from company to company. It's hard. There is no blanket answer really. Um, in a like Ticketmaster is a big Rundeck user. They have I don't know what they call themselves anymore, but they were kind of like a system engineering team. I think they're called platform engineering.
Mm.
And their story that they had is they had a lot of routine processes that they had to run for themselves. So they stood up a single Rundeck instance. Actually, their manager did, and he started taking some of the scripts they were using and plugging them in as jobs and then calling jobs across those jobs. And he was pretty happy. He was like, hey, this is saving me time. My life is easy now. And the rest of his team started doing that too. So they were doing it for themselves. But then others started to say, hey, I like how you're able to do your routine processes like that. I would like that too. So they started creating projects for those other teams, and they start doing it for QA to begin with, and then they started doing it for devs. And so they started building a clustered Rundeck because now it had become more important. Then some of the other dev teams were like, I really like this, but I don't want to be stuck using your Rundeck instance. I want to write plugins and experiment and try different versions of things. So they started standing up their own Rundeck instances, and then
Oh,
and then when it came time to production, they said, okay, well, we've been kind of playing on our own land here. We'll start passing off our Rundeck stuff to your centralized Rundeck.
so would it be like master client model or master slave, or how does that happen?
No, they didn't use a master slave model. They just basically were like islands, and
Oh,
and when it came time to move into the production realm, they released jobs as an artifact. So
mhm.
these jobs, I've been showing you in the GUI, but these jobs, let's see, maybe YAML. These jobs can be defined as text file. So there's a YAML, here's an XML, there's a JSON equivalent. So what they do is they treat it like code, is what I'm trying to say. um, really big company, you will generally have a centralized Rundeck instance or a cluster or something, but there may be other Rundeck instances outside of that. And the way they collaborate then is they release them as artifacts, just like you would any other kind of code. So yeah, these jobs get stored in a source control system. There's a build process that takes all the jobs, puts them in an artifact called an archive. The archive goes in a repository. People promote archives from one Rundeck instance to the other. I mean, it just all of a sudden looks just like any other kind of application artifact.
Hmm.
Let me log back out here and become admin again. One thing I think I'll end with here is this key storage facility. So,
Yeah.
because this is another place where environments or companies differ, some places will have a Rundeck that can talk to all the nodes, and they use one key. Let's say, for example, that there's a service account that Rundeck is going to use to talk to all the nodes. Maybe that service account is called a deploy user.
Hmm.
And every host has this deploy user. The deploy user account is allowed to do all the things the deploy has to do. And so there's a key for deploy. And people can take that key and put it on Rundeck. And anytime Rundeck's going to talk to a machine, it's going to use that key. That's what we call the default key. That's about as simple as you can be. Simple as in the most basic.
Hmm.
But in reality, you might have to have many different keys because each machine has different service account on it. So you might have some machine with the app tier service account, for running Tomcat. You have another machine that has a service account to run the middleware and everything else,
Hmm.
right? So depending on the machine you're talking to, you might have a different key. And in the most extreme, I guess I call it the most extreme, let me call it the most granular case, you want every person that logs into Rundeck to have their own key so that when they talk to the remote host, they're using their own identity to talk to that remote host.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's kind of the most granular. So this key storage feature is meant for managing however many keys you have to manage. So you can organize them the way you want. So
Hmm.
let me go back to production. So here I am, guitars production. So let's say that I want to manage all my production keys for guitar under a certain folder. And then in this story, actually, I forgot, each machine has its own key. So let's pretend the InfoSec guys said, hey, I want to have traceability to the machine level. So here are folders for all my machines, and here's my public key, here's my private key. And each of these keys has a path. Okay, so hopefully you can remember that. Let me do my tab here. And I want to show you something here. Guitars production, nodes. So we're looking at app 1. You see that right here? That's we call the key storage path. Is this. So what you can do is you can upload your keys here. You can do this through the API, or you can do it in the GUI, but you can upload your keys here, and then you can record in your node info to use that key. Okay, so this is nice, centralized way of managing the keys that Rundeck uses to access nodes. But it turns out this is actually a little bit more generic than what I've been saying. It's not just for keys; it can also be for passwords. So you can talk to your machines using a key or using username password. So you can store passwords like here, let me show you that. These are the different things you can key types you can use. And so when you write a plugin that talks to other machines, the plugin interface lets you get at this data. So for example, let's say I have a customized way of using SSH, and I can write a plugin that will give me the data for the key because my plugin needs to take that key data and do something special with it so it can run the SSH the way I need to run it. So the plugins can get access to this, but yes, there you go. All right, well, that's I think a pretty good overview of Rundeck. Hopefully I haven't forgotten anything. This has sort of been the basics. I didn't get into the access control policy stuff, but I think we've hit pretty much everything else that's important for a beginning user.
It's like the information is overwhelming, and it's really too much of information, and it's really good, Alex.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, it's been a kind of a crash course intro.
Right.